All right, we're live. Welcome, Scott.
It's been way too long, John. Way too long.
Yep. This is exciting. So you were just on Ignite last week. You were speaking about the future of .Net, and then we've got .Net Conf coming up in November. So this is a great time to be talking about.
.Net 5 is going to ship November 10th. So I mean, we're just a little over a month away from shipping the next version of the platform.
Really, really exciting. Wow. Well, I can't wait to dig into all the stuff you're going to be showing us. Let me start off, as we always do, with community links. So let me jump right into those. As always, there's a ton of stuff going on in the community. I had some links already together, and then I asked on Twitter and just got flooded with them. I tried to some great ones that are Blazor specific. We're moving to next week because next week we're starting our monthly Blazor show. So ASP.NET, we have regular shows on Blazor, and we figured why not just make it a monthly thing. So Safia is going to be co-hosting that with me, and we'll be starting that next Tuesday. But let's dig in. So as always, these links are shared out in the chat. They're shared out in the description. I'll throw them in the chat right now. And lots of good stuff. We'll dig right in here. First of all, Patrick has this end-to-pen tool. And I like this. He regularly does this. He's been doing this for years and years, where he goes through and compares APIs between versions. So here he's just looking at in .NET 5, and it's this is a deep post. You can see from the scroll bar. He goes into, real deep detail. Some things that kind of jump out at me are there's definitely there's system net connections API, which is interesting. There's also, of course, the system text JSON serializer, a lot of stuff going on with that, and a lot of important things for perf, especially, of course. So system net HTTP JSON extension methods, and he goes into a lot of depth on all these. So this is a meaty post and a lot of information here, but definitely worth taking some time to look at. And then at the end, Patrick, he links over and he's got this end-to-pen tool that helps you do this. So this is just a ton of information here. It's really great. This is neat. People have been doing some neat things with source generators. So, the team has been saying, hey, some things that we expected a lot of interest in and some things that we expected some slow uptake on. Source generators was one where they thought would take some time for people to really dig into, and people are getting into these already really in depth. So here's an example of using Core RT and JSON source generator. So the nice thing with this is source generator at build time, generating from JSON, and then the end result is super tiny, super fast startup time and super tiny size. So this is really kind of an experiment at this point. But really neat to see this, taking JSON files and then building stuff and then, compiling, tree shake, all that stuff, and get these tiny things. So tons of cool experiments and things that people are doing right now with source generators already. Oh, and it's the 425 show rating us. Welcome. Okay, a few cool updates from the ABP team. So they're doing some great stuff. And they've been around for a while. ABP is come over from ASP.NET boilerplate, and they have an open source version and a paid commercial version. This is a very sophisticated system that does all kinds of things with it's an opinionated framework, and it really helps you build structured applications quickly. What's really cool here, they're announcing a new Blazor UI. So they've actually brought over the developer, I believe, from Blazor Eyes to help build this. So it's a full Blazor UI that builds on top of the ABP system. So they do a walkthrough of how to build this. As you'll see, it's very structured. Everything's set up and broken up between the API and the front ends. So a lot of great support for all kinds of things, and of course this Blazor client. So good stuff. Here's a post describing it, and another thing they're announcing is they've got some detailed documents as well. So here's updated documents, and they've really put a lot of work into this. I think I'm sure you'd agree, Scott, the key benefit of the .NET ecosystem is having this great blend, and you've got the open source frameworks out there, and then you've also got these amazing products that people build and support for years and have great, you can get support from them and components, etc. So
yep. And cool. We're going to show some of that today as well. Very
cool. Here's a neat one. This is from the Exception List team, and they've upgraded their production. They're running on .NET 5 already. They couldn't wait. So they're talking about, they're already seeing, here's some reasons why they've jumped in. So they've got, of course, the performance improvements are amazing. Also taking advantage of C# features like record support and Docker improvements as well. So just cool to see people jumping in, trying it out. And so, of course, performance is always a big thing. But speaking of performance, James Newton King just tweeted this last night. So he's built out an example, and this is showing a comparison with gRPC just compared to JSON, and he's seeing 70% smaller network usage and deserialization 10 times faster. So this is cool. He's got this live site where you can try it out, and just cool to see it. So this is fun to see. I love how James is always building experiments on top of things, and so he's writing the code, but he's also building these cool experiments to test it and understand what's going on. So. All right, Scott Brady talked about this is an advantage in .NET 5 with certificate management. So PEM keys is something that apparently has had spotty or patchy support in Windows and .NET in the past. And he talks about, with .NET Core 3.1, you had to do a few things, and you really kind of had to understand the details of how PEM worked. And with .NET 5, it's just a few lines. So this is pretty neat, including, loading a PEM certificate. It couldn't be much simpler. So it shows loading the PEM certificate in just a few lines, and then using that in Kestrel. So this is neat, just pointing to the path and key path. So something I wasn't aware of, but this is great to know, to see that support. And then finally, as I'm wrapping up, one of the cool things that you talked about and that came out at Ignite was the support for Blazor and Azure static web apps.
Yeah.
So that's just such a cool combo of having, you've got your Blazor for your front end, and then you need a lightweight back end, and serving that from an Azure static web app is really cool.
I think it's hard to grasp. When this is one of the things that I recorded this for Bill for Ignite, as you said, and I wasn't actually happy with that part of the recording, because I didn't think I described the value prop of this. The way to think about this is, if you host an app in the cloud, any cloud, whether it's Azure or not, there's a server there, and that server is running your code and running CPU to. What are you doing, John?
Oh, I was checking something. I forgot it was overlapping the screen. Sorry about that.
But it's it's running CPU cycles to run your web app. And the whole point of the static web apps is, what if your website doesn't need to do any of that? And so in this particular case, because your app is a Blazor WASM app, the server doesn't need to do anything. And so the static web app cost you almost nothing, because all it really is doing is serving static files. There's no .NET code running in the cloud in that scenario, which means your cost to host the app is super cheap. And then, as you said, what that sample app does is it has an Azure function here or there to return some of the results. And once again, the cool parts of Azure functions is they only run while you're calling them. So once again, if your app's set idle the whole day, your cost to run it's almost zero. And so to me, it's hard to get my mind wrapped around the idea that my server, for the most part, doesn't do anything at all other than serve static files. It's literally the equivalent of hosting your app in a storage blob and putting a URL to it. The difference here is this tech also supports, GitHub Actions and stuff like that. So, you build all your code in a Git repo, and then the actions fire it over to the static site.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. It's something that we've kind of, or, people have been doing a little bit already, even like the site live.net that serves this up. We have back-end functions, and then we have front end, and it's being converted to Blazor now and is using React for a bit and stuff. But you have this pattern of a single page app and then a back-end function, like you said, only paying for what you use. And a lot of the time for these SPA applications, it's static files you're delivering, and then you're calling back for those functions. So it's really nice to have a supported, documented way to do all this.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. And then Niels also just wrote a walkthrough on doing this as well. So, I showed the docs, and then cool to see community going in and writing up. This is his walkthrough and how it worked for him. So, just neat to see the integration. Nice blog post too. All the, pushing it out to GitHub and all this stuff. Yeah. Yep. Niels does quality blog posts. I always love his. So a lot of, screenshots and just, cool to see. And then things like digging into the GitHub Actions and stuff. So, and the last one I wanted to share was just the link over. So if people want to see your talk from Ignite and all the stuff, this is a link to that. That's all I've got. It's always exciting to see the community, the excitement and the exploration, the things people are trying out and digging in and stuff.
I'm surprised every week, every month that I see the crazy stuff that people build, and it's so exciting. Let's talk about something cool, John.
All right.
So a couple things to think about here is we have .NET Conf coming up on November the 10th. Mm-hmm. That's our virtual online conference where we're going to launch .NET 5. And as part of that, I'll kind of leak out. So now we can't back out for sure, is we plan to have Scott Guthrie in the keynote of .NET Conf with me. And as we're trying to prepare for this, in fact, I'm going to meet with Scott in about a week and a half. And we're going to go over, what his segment of the keynote is going to be. What we've been thinking about doing for that segment of the keynote is talking about some of the points in time in .NET.
Wow.
Because there's been lots of points in time that I can think of. If you go way back in time to like 2008, that was shipping MVC for the first time, mm-hmm. Doing it with in a semi open source way. We at least put the source code out there. That was a milestone. Another big milestone I think of is probably 2012. That's when we open sourced all of ASP.NET and Entity Framework. Yeah. For the the right way as well, which we were taking contributions. But then something happened right after that, and I sometimes forget the customers. I mean, if you've been on the journey with us and you're trying out .NET Core, which we shipped for the first time in the summer of I shouldn't say summer, July of 2016. Tools didn't show up until 2017. I thought today maybe we would briefly talk about the history of how .NET Core came to be.
Sounds fun. I remember you early on talking to you, and you're like, "Hey, come check this out." And you were showing me stuff. I'm like, "This is neat, but I don't think this is too crazy." Like,
I actually remember. I think you and I were at an Italian restaurant in Redmond because you were up visiting, and we're having dinner together. And I'm telling you all this stuff, and I think you probably thought I was on drugs or something. There's no way this is all going to happen. But it is a funny point in time. So I'm going to show some slides that we put together back in 2013. Interestingly enough, right after we had open sourced, all the ASP.NET tech on back in the day. When we started thinking about doing what is now .NET Core, we knew that we had to go run it by both Scott Guthrie and Jason Zander. Mm-hmm. Scott and Jason were the two big VPs at the time that you had to go run these ideas by. And this is going to sound crazy. I think we spent over half a year preparing the deck for Scott and Jason. And I think we've talked about it on the stand-up way back in the past. But we spent all this time working on this deck to go and sell the concept of doing a new .NET that's the open source. Well, I shouldn't say actually open source. It wasn't going to be open source at the time. It was we were going to go sell the new composable .NET that would replace the tech that we have today. And the thinking was around that 2012 era, we started looking at, this was Damian Edwards and I. We were looking at how do we take system web, that's the web stack that's inside of .NET Framework, forward. And the only way that we could take it forward was basically to go take it out of band. We'd already done MVC out of band. We'd done Web API out of band. We'd made Entity Framework go out of band. Meaning we had the ability to have a version that we could make breaking changes in and not, destroy the ecosystem. And so Levi Broderick on the engineering team helped us, and we actually got system.web running outside of, we could run a private copy of system.web on .NET Framework. And so Damien and I were super excited. We're like, yeah, we're going to go take all the old bits out of web forms that don't belong there anymore. That, there's lots of features in web forms that got deprecated over time, but they still were there and people still use them. And so we thought we had this path forward. We built the predecessor to Kestrel. How do you host this out of band system web in the product? And then one day we tried to make it work with Visual Studio, and we hit a wall. Mainly because Visual Studio loads a copy of system.web. It can't load two. And so we had to go look at, okay, well, do we change Visual Studio so it could load a different version of system.web? And I think it was Levi, and he came back and told us we had to make over 1,000 changes to Visual Studio. And I didn't think the odds of us going into the room and telling them we were going to make 1,000 changes to Visual Studio to support this out of band, it felt like we'd hit the end of a wall. And so we had to do some next generation thinking. And so let me share this real quick. And so for folks that don't know, can you see that, John?
I don't yet. You did share screen?
It's my fault. 1 second. Now you can.
Yep.
Okay. So what we did is, and you can look at the dates of this. I plan to talk to Scott about this when I talk to him in the keynote of .NET Conf. We started something called Project K, aka Cloud.net, and also to realize this was the ASP.NET team. This is not we were not the .NET team. We were the ASP.NET team, and so we primarily think from the web. And I just want to be very clear: we were not part of .NET at the time. So we wrote a deck, and the deck, as we go through it, it's not meant to be a negative deck. It was meant to be something that would change your thinking. Meaning that, we've been shipping a product for a long time, and you get close to the thing that you're shipping, that sometimes you need to go back out to a 5 or 10 or 15,000 foot view and go, what are all the challenges and the problems with the tech that we're building? And so this is a deck that kind of talked about, this was the initial ideas around this. And then David Fowler, I think, wrote the first prototype of what became ASP.NET Core and .NET Core, that we then showed around November of this year at the MVP Summit of 2013. And so, and once again, as I said, don't look at this slide as being a negative slide. .NET Framework is an amazing piece of tech. But, these are the challenges we had with the .NET Framework. Number one is it was old. And when I mean old, I mean, it's full of a bunch of, if you notice down here, contains obsolete server components. The .NET Framework, when we started this journey, there was like 2 versions of workflow in .NET Framework. Yuck. There was something called Hailstorm, which was a a predecessor to like, Azure Active Directory.
Yeah.
There was lots of just dead code inside of there. But if you think about it, it was monolithic, meaning it was one huge thing. It was an OS component. This is one of the biggest challenges we had. It was a part of Windows. If you're part of Windows, you belong in Windows servicing. You belong in that's why it says heavy servicing burden. You belong in compatibility. We want to make sure that Windows operating systems are super compatible version to version, which means Damien and I could not go and propose taking a bunch of things out of system.web because it would break some app somewhere in the world.
People forget that. Then it was that there were reasons why Visual Studio and .NET shipped like every 2 years or something, because it was so hard to get it all to work together, right? And then it's like,
yeah, exactly. It was so hard to get to work together. We did all kinds of attempts. There was back in the .NET 3.5 timeframe, we did something called Red Bits. There was parts of .NET you could touch. There was parts of .NET you could not touch. And trying to solve these compatibility burdens. There was performance issues. Those are historic. I mean, we've talked about these for many, many times. When we built ASP.NET System Web, we meant for it to be semi-compatible with active server pages. And so we baked a bunch of stuff in that you don't need. Back in those days, you're probably aware of this, John, there was this notion of modules that loaded in ASP.NET, and we defaulted all the modules in, whether you needed those capabilities or not. We defaulted them in, and it was hard to know how to turn them off. And of course, we're the web team, and so we're like, why does .NET contain non-server components? Why does your web app need to have WinForms or WPF or any of those things? And then you can also see that Windows Phone, it forked .NET into their own specific SKUs.
You can hit hide on that little thing at the bottom too. It's overlapping your slide.
Thank you. And so the idea behind Project K, and if you wonder where the K comes from, we had been doing a project called Katana, and it was a way that we were kind of disentangling some of the bits in ASP.NET at the time. And so Project K just kind of took it was meant as an evolution of Katana, which is why that's where the K came from. Interestingly enough, if you want trivia, the Microsoft Band team was also called Project K. We only know that because we already had grabbed the aliases inside of the Exchange server at Microsoft, and they came to us asking, can we have that? And we're like, no, we're using it. But you see here, it was meant to be a lean, composable .NET stack that provides, modern web frameworks and cloud scenarios. And so you can see this, a small core CLR that only contains fundamental building blocks. And I'll talk as we go through this, so what we've changed since then. Framework to be an ecosystem of packages. We'd already moved ASP.NET, MVC and Web API and MDG framework and web pages. They were all based on packages. It was our way of, being out of .NET framework, letting us move. So the idea was everything would be packages in this world. Packages, in .NET framework had crazy versioning and servicing rules. So we wanted to simplify those. The true side-by-side, that was an important part of this. We wanted the ability to actually have the platform be able to be multiple versions on the machine and not, conflict with each other. And you can see the big one there. We don't want to be a Windows component.
That whole side-by-side thing is huge, and people may forget about that now, but I remember early on as a .NET developer going and I went to some training on .NET 2, like .NET, .NET Framework 2.0. I was really excited about the membership and some of these other features, and then I came back and I was working at a financial company. I said, okay, we got to get on this. We have master pages. We have all this cool stuff. And they said, we can't because you'll break all the other apps. Maybe in about 2 years, we'll upgrade our servers. And I'm like, it's time for me to find a new job. I can't wait 2 years.
I same thing happened to me, John. I was actually working at a company, and .NET 2 had just come out, and tons of new features. And I had the same fight. I finally was able to get them to give me one server that I could play with .NET 2 on. And I was just like you, John. I'm like telling them, we can be so much more efficient. These apps are going to be so much better. But the cycles when the framework is kind of like a part of the operating system just makes it super slow. I mean, most companies back in that era only upgraded to new .NETs when they upgraded to new versions of Windows. So you had to wait, for a new Windows, and sometimes those Windows gaps were big. And you can see here were some of the ideas that we had for customers. Modern, cutting edge web, simple, easy developer experience. Surface area, meaning that you don't have all the non-web stuff get in your face. That is the side by side comes up again here. App runs on the exact bits it was compiled against. You don't build it on one machine on one version of .NET and then publish it to a server on something else. I love this. App only loads assemblies it truly needs. Some of these just make sense. Better throughput.
But that was, as you mentioned before, that was a problem before, because when we were comparing performance, you were loading up this whole giant .NET framework that could do all kinds of stuff, like manage, like you said, there were bits from 5-10 years ago for different stacks that were still in there, right? So,
well, and we had done dumb stuff too, like MVC and Web API. Well, how do they work? Well, there's classes called controllers. Well, how do you find the classes that are called controllers? Well, you load all the assemblies and look for it. And we did other crazy stuff, John. It used to be that when you would boot up an ASP.NET app, MVC would look for all the controllers, and then Web API would look again. we didn't think about, hey, that's kind of a common thing. Why don't we just do it once and share it across all the stuff? And you can see obviously improved throughput, performance has been a big thing for us. Optimized for cloud diagnostics. That was our revelation that in system web there wasn't really a diagnostic story at all. There was a web page you could hit on a web form application that would kind of show you the page state, but there was no real diagnostics in there, and there was no good way to turn it on when you put it to the cloud. And then of course this was all before there was big Azure and AWS and Google Cloud. So you can see hosters at this point. It wasn't clouds. It was primarily hosters were the primary places that you did the stuff. And so we wanted the hosters to get the product faster, and we wanted them to be able to run cheaper so they could sell it cheaper to their customers.
And that was always a frustration too. The same, we went from talking about how like big financial companies, but also hosters, you would have your site on a host and they're running an old version of .NET, and you're like logging a support ticket. Like, when are you going to put the new thing on there? So, yeah.
So this is crazy. Look at that, John. ARM64 support. We were thinking of ARM64 in 2013. And we'll go through one or more of these, and we can jump to some other stuff. But I thought it's just kind of fun to look at this. And you can see obviously the primary workloads for us were, web pages, MVC, REST with Web API, real-time collaboration that was SignalR, and being able to use the Azure SDK. This actually shows some of the early compatibility. An MVC, web pages, Web API, SignalR code should not be super hard to port over. Most third-party libraries should have, a Project K version. And this is where you start seeing parts of full .NET will not be carried forward to Project K. This was realizing that there's some legacy in there that doesn't need to come forward. What else is interesting here? Here you go. Look at this. Only built on core, containing things that will never become obsolete. This is something that we still hopefully are striving to in .NET today. We don't want to bring obsolete stuff into, that's why people ask us, why did you not bring something over? Well, if it's something that if you would build an app today with it, we would bring it. If you would only build an app that you're porting from 10 years ago, that doesn't make sense to come over. And you can see that it should just be packages everywhere. Making the rules on how we load assemblies much simpler. Remember all the assembly binding redirects and all the crazy stuff in the projects back then, John, that just made your brain hurt.
Oh man. Yeah. And that was something where it was, you could show off at work by knowing how to do all the binding redirects and all that kind of stuff, but it also was a huge headache. And it was part of why I working at companies, it would be like, hey, we're going to start deployment Friday night, and everyone planned to, you may have to stay all weekend until we get it working on the production server. You never knew if it was going to work.
So you can see number 4 was everything's packages, and then number 5 was basically that you deploy. Basically, what number 5 is saying is there's no GAC, which was the global assembly cache that we had in .NET before. And once again, as you said, it was one of those dangerous things that if you had something, the GAC overrode everything, and so by putting something in the GAC, you could actually break an application. And so we wanted to get away from that. Now, there's 2 things. If you go back at these slides we've shown, you're missing. What have you not seen here so far, John? There's 2 things that we.
Well, let me see. Well,
open source is nowhere listed.
Yeah,
here.
that's huge. That's huge. It's so funny. That's just baked into my brain now. I assume it, but yeah, you're right.
So there's no open source, and there's no cross-platform here.
Oh, that's right. So again, that's something where I'm like, of course it's cross-platform open source. Wow.
So I remember us preparing. It wasn't this exact deck, but us working on this for a long time, and a few of us, I think it was Dimitri Robson, David Fowler, and myself, we get on Scott Guthrie and Jason Zander's calendar, and we're planning, we're going to go present this for an hour, and we're expecting a fight. And we roll into, I think it was Scott Guthrie's office at the time, and we start the deck, and we get through like 3 or 4 slides. And Scott and Jason look at us and they go, well, Jason goes, well, this doesn't go far enough. He goes, this needs to be fully open source and needs to be cross-platform. And remember, this is 2013. This is not the Microsoft of today. And I think our jaws just hit the floor. We're like, oh, wow. I mean, they basically threw out the gauntlet to just go completely bold. And so the whole meeting lasted, I think, under 10 minutes.
Wow.
Because it was like, they knew that .NET needed to make a transition. And so there was no convincing, but that is a fun part of the original story.
One quick question, sorry, but before you switch off those slides, there's one thing towards the end. I think it was the second to last one. You showed Project N. I think it was like slide. There it is. Project N. Project KNN compatibility.
Yeah. So Project N would be .NET Native.
Okay.
And if not, I'm pretty sure that's what Project N was. It was .NET Native, and .NET Native, for people that don't know what that is, that's what ended up being the version of .NET, or the style of .NET that is in UWP applications. And so that's .NET that we actually compile to native code, and so it doesn't have to be JITted when the application starts. So like the common between Project N and Project K.
So another question here is, were you thinking about project system and new CS Proj format and stuff at this point, or was this?
We were.
Was that kind of later?
We were. So that is actually covered here on this slide here, where it says simple lean developer experience. That would be an example of where the project system kind of stuff would come into play here. Obviously, we went through a whole model of project system where we, first off, Project K had its own project system that was not in Visual Studio. It was not based on CS Proj at all. That was our magical JSON project system. And so one of the key tenets of this was, which I don't think this deck talks about. No. Yeah, it's too early. One of the other tenets of this was, I think probably after the Scott and Jason meeting, once we decided that we were going to go cross-platform, that brought the requirement that you might not be in Visual Studio to build your app. So which is what led to project system being something we had to go change. Was there's no way that you could, hand edit a CS proj of the 2013 era, especially on an editor on a Mac or a Linux device.
Mm-hmm.
We built our own project system to start with, and then obviously before we shipped, version 1 of the tooling in March of 2017, we moved back to the CS proj that already was used for .NET, but we moved to a simplified version of it, which is what we have today.
Because those CS projects, like you were saying, there'd be hundreds of lines of XML, and you're so scared to break something. There'd be like I want to do a binding redirect, or I need to add a module or a handler, but if I do this or edit a configuration, connection string, and you're like, well, I might break my whole app.
Exactly, or if Visual Studio of that era, when that happens, it just won't load your project. The whole project, the files disappear, and you can only edit that one file, and you just have to hope. How do I find out in 600 lines of XML where I forgot to close something, or I put a wrong character somewhere that was there? But I don't, the building our own project system really was something that happened after, I think, the cross-platform thing came to play.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to look at this deck and not see not the open source or cross-platform, which are such big tenets of how we build, .NET today.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And it's a natural progression when you talk about making it not an operating system component and not shipped with Windows, then it's like that decouples it, and it can be cross-platform.
Exactly. Huh. The biggest thing is not being in Windows is Windows brings that compatibility requirement, and it also brings the servicing burden. So, we still support, and we have teams that work on fixing bugs in .NET 3.5 today. And I think .NET 3.5 shipped in 2008.
Yep.
So over 12 years ago, and we're still, that's the challenge of being in Windows. Once you're in Windows, your lifetime. I was just talking to two customers in the last week. Were asking about the support of active server pages. Active server pages, which was the predecessor to ASP.NET, it shipped in 1996. So still supported today, 24 years later.
Yeah. And it's both, I mean, it's easy to see that in a negative way, but it's also great for customers to be able to take, to know they can rely on a technology. They can say, hey, I can look at what the support is for this, and I can, so.
I see a question over there. What was the rationale behind going open source? Was it competition from Node.js? And I would actually say no. It was not the competition from Node.js. We started open sourcing parts of ASP.NET, years before 2008. We introduced MVC in an open source flavor. In 2012, we took contributions on MVC. What caused open source to happen was, as my team traveled around the world talking to customers, we saw this slow change starting to happen where companies were embracing open source. I remember being somewhere talking to a customer, and they said, we're going to pay for operating systems, and that'll be the only closed source component that we're going to use. And everything else will be open source.
Wow. And
so the ASP.NET team heard more and more of that as time went on, and we realized, how do you compete against, and I'll date us, because MVC was more going after Ruby on Rails, but it was open. How do you compete against open when you're closed? And the reality is, being open source is a way of leveling the playing field. So .NET had a chance to be something that somebody would consider.
Did you expect at the time, like there were parts of ASP.NET, like you said, that were open source on Codeplex, and they took some community contributions, but it was like, here's our source code. Did you expect the amount of community pull requests and community involvement in Project K?
I don't think we did. All up, if you go back to there's a slide that you showed earlier. It was one of my Ignite slides, and I'll bring it up on my machine just to share, because I have it here too. me switch back to sharing my screen. This was the slide that you were showing, John, earlier.
Yep.
And on this slide, we talked about being one of the top 30 highest velocity OSS projects. And so we've done the analysis on GitHub to go find out. And Beth Massey has an amazing slide somewhere, John, that actually shows all the different texts, and it shows where .NET compares to things like Linux and Kubernetes and stuff like that. But you see, we're top 30. I never expected that, because for the most part, we open sourced late. One of the things that I regret is not finding a way to get us open source faster, because if you look at the package ecosystem around Java, it's better than ours. And that's because they were open source earlier, and I mean a lot earlier. And so I think it was a barrier to entry to our market, and it was a barrier to entry for writing packages for us, and a variety of other things. But because we really open sourced in 2014, that was when we announced .NET Core was coming, and we fully open sourced all the bits. To think that we open sourced in 2014 and we're in the top 30 in GitHub, that is shocking to me, actually, and it makes me very happy too.
Yeah. And it's exciting to see then, as people are digging in and trying out things, and some of the performance gains and all those things, having be a collaborative effort with the community, and seeing including like the early things where everyone was community was jumping in on Kestrel, and then also seeing people giving pull requests for like Linux transports, and like these advanced certificate management and other things that are operating system specific. It makes a huge difference.
I want to grab one of these questions. There's a great question here. The one that's Windows has a certain long support time frame, which is beneficial to some customers. Did this, how do we think about this? I think this is a crazy important thing to understand. When we think of .NET today, our support model that we have in .NET Core / .NET 5, .NET 6 is designed, we ship every year, and then every other year is a long-term support release, which means you have roughly 3 years of support on a given LTS. If you pick up 3.1, you're good for 3 years. You can then run .NET 6 for 3 years, and you might ask, that Windows support policy of supporting stuff for 10, 15, 20 years, it's great. It is amazing that you can go build an application and not touch it for 20 years and it still runs. And we did not do that in the .NET Core world, because in that world, when we were working on .NET Framework, a good percentage of our team worked on supporting the old releases. And
there's a balance. There's a trade-off to it. Yeah.
How much? Yeah, that's the trade-off. The trade-off is how much of your team do you want to work on supporting the older releases? And so with Core and /5, the goal was to only have 2 versions in long-term support at a time.
Can you talk a second, because I've talked to some people and they'll say, okay, there's .NET 5, but it's not an LTS release, so I need to wait for .NET 6. And I think there's maybe some misunderstanding on that people think they need to wait for an LTS. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that comes up all the time. And in many cases, people are, I'll give you a great example. I'm in Asia in January of this year, and I'm sitting with a customer, and they're deciding they're in the process of rewriting their platform, and they're going to do it on .NET Core, and I think they chose to do .NET Core 3.1, and they're asking me the question. It's like, yeah, we have to wait to .NET 6 after 3.1, but during that conversation, they said something really funny. They're like, yeah, we update Angular every 6 weeks. And I'm like, you don't want to update .NET for 3 or 4 years, but you're willing to update the JavaScript framework for your client UI every 6 weeks. And I'm like, why am I different? and the room got quiet, and they could not tell me why. Because here's the reality. Maybe you don't want to upgrade because you're afraid of a breaking change. Totally get that. But even if you stay on .NET Core 3.1, if you want to stay supported, you need to update your .NET Core 3.1 almost every month. We patch .NET. I mean, we skip a month occasionally, but for the most part, there's typically a servicing update every month. And so I would ask a customer, are you actually grabbing those servicing updates every month? Are you actually sticking with the version that came out in December and sitting on it for a couple months? If you call our support will only support you if you're on the latest patch version. Because we don't go and patch old versions in the history. So if you're having a problem, you would always have to verify that. So I would challenge, if you're a .NET customer, you should be updating once a month anyways. And if you're updating once a month, the move from a 3 to a 5 should not be a big deal. Now, we as the .NET team, I will be very honest, and Damien would tell you the same thing. For versions 1, 2, and 3, we kind of changed the way .NET was put together. Every .NET Core was put together, every single one of those. Those are not the easiest transitions. But I do believe we're maturing now. And as we mature, we actually talk about this during planning. Our goal with .NET 6 is it should take any .NET 5 customer no more than 10 minutes to upgrade their app to .NET 6.
Wow, we need bumper stickers with that or something.
Well, as I said, that's a planning. It's a goal. I can't say we'll hit it, but it is something that we, as the platform matures, we want to make moving from version to version easier. And then I would hope you're just on the latest monthly version every month, and the bump to 5 to 6 and 6 to 7 is not a big deal. Now there are customers that do have very valid needs to have a long-term support. We talk to some customers in manufacturing, and they will go build something and put it into the warehouses, and it does not change for a long period of time.
Like you said, warehouses, a medical device or whatever kind of thing.
Right? We talked to some medical companies that do MRIs and stuff like that, and they don't have the ability to go in and patch the device. That said, hopefully the risk of those devices is less as well if they're not internet connected, or hopefully you're not hitting a web browser on your MRI machine.
Yeah. Whoa. And then definitely, like, a lot of the choices that you were talking about with the design, being able to run side by side and being able to run cloud native and all these sorts of things make it easier to update, because you're not worrying about, I can deploy a .NET 5 and a .NET 3.1 version of my application on the same server and not worry, or I can use Docker, or I can, all those sorts of improvements there. So,
and we'll get as I said, we'll get better in those cases, and we want to provide more tools, as well. I did want to show one more demo. I haven't really showed a demo, but I want to show a demo, John.
All right.
So you were showing components earlier of stuff, and this is actually a preview of something I'm going to show at .NET Conf. And I'm going to show it in the context of one control vendor. I want to preface before I show this, we have lots of control vendors, and I'm not trying to give one control vendor more love than the next. But on this .NET Core 3.1 journey, we brought Winforms and WPF into the platforms, and we did that. If you look at those reasonings in Project K, we said not to bring obsolete things in. We don't consider WPF and Winforms to be obsolete. We have millions of customers using them every day. But along this journey, we've been slowly, and I'll switch to share my screen again real quick, and I'll go to a VS. I'm trying to show things, John, you've not shown before. So.
Yep, which is hard. We're on every week, and
hopefully you've not shown this before. This is so we've been working on the designer for Winforms for .NET Core, and so you can see we've got all of the primary controls now in the designer. If you're on the latest version of Visual Studio, they're all there. The one missing piece is, how does a third-party control vendor get their stuff into the platform? So if I go look at my CS Proj over here, you will see that I'm actually referencing, minimize a bunch of stuff here. I am referencing the Telerik .NET 5 controls. And Telerik has now got their controls in the right shape, so they show up in our designer. So this, if I click on it here and bring up the properties, I will scroll up to the top. Well, you can just see it right here. I'll just zoom in to make it easier. You can see that's a rad check list box. So, and here it is.
So just by referencing that NuGet package that exposes that, makes it available for the toolbox?
Right over here in the toolbox.
Wow.
So you can see all the controls here. Show right up in the toolbox. And then I had drug one over here, put it on the form. And if I go to the properties for that, and go down to there's columns. I want to put some columns in, but you can see all the UI looks up and does all the right stuff. And so hopefully we're pretty close, John, to being able to have all of the third-party control ecosystem start showing up directly in the Winform designer, which will end the journey of capabilities. I showed Telerik, but all the other folks are doing the work too, so they'll all show up in the future.
That's such a cool, like there's .NET is such an interesting ecosystem because now we've got this open source cross-platform, tons of community built things. And then we also have that component vendor ecosystem, which is important for businesses that want, to buy something with a support contract and, like they want to pay something, or maybe as a startup at the beginning, I want to buy some components and then later I'm going to write my own or whatever. So having that kind of selection of, the broad ecosystem is really cool. So that's exciting to see that. Wow.
I can show one more that you probably have not done on the show. So let me just load up something here while we're. I assume that's never been shown on the show, John?
Never has. No, not to my knowledge. Although we do have a Thursday show that's on desktop, but I don't think I've seen that there.
I just got it to work a week ago, so.
So then no, probably we scooped them. Yeah, that's been a neat thing over time. We started with the ASP. I think early on, as part of the whole kind of change in how, Microsoft and the ASP.NET team was working, that was around, the ASP.NET community stand-up started, I believe, in 2014. And a lot of the early shows were, here's a sketch on a whiteboard, as Damien and David and folks were kind of figuring out how they wanted things to work. And now we have 3 shows a week and all the different areas and stuff.
So this you've probably seen a little bit of on the show before. I'm almost got it. I'll almost have it up, and I'll bring it up and show the code. Okay. One sec.
The suspense.
This will be something that David Fowler and I showed at the .NET Conf microservice show.
That was really cool too. I love those focus shows, the .NET Conf focus shows, and the microservice one.
And this is a .NET Core 3.1 application. It's kind of your minimal web app. It's got the program, it's got the main, all of that stuff. This is the same one using .NET 5, and it's using top level programs. So there is no main. You just basically write the code, inline in the page.
And I don't see it yet. Are you sharing it yet? Or are you still?
Maybe I should share my screen, John.
Yeah.
Be an amazing idea.
Or we can just talk about it.
So let's go back here. Here's the 3.11, and this is a lightweight application when it comes to the amount of stuff on the page here. You got your main, you've got your class programs. You have to have every .NET app has to have a class that surrounds the main code. You've got the main code, that's the entry point to the application, and so on. And then here's the same version of that running on .NET 5, and notice that the program is gone, the main class is gone, and the main's gone. So this is using top level programs, and you can see we can knock a chunk of lines of code off of here, and you get to an API that has more of the footprint of something that maybe in something like Node.js would look like. And kind of one of our goals to make it like that. But one of the cool parts of this is, have you talked about the linker at all?
David showed a little bit with the linker. Yeah. He showed some experiments. It's and those things, I think it's easy to look and go like, oh, it's just a few lines of code we're cutting out. But the idea when you've got these microservices and the whole service code is just a few lines, you're cutting that code in half. And then with the linker, again, cutting the size down makes a big difference if you've got lots of microservices.
Okay, so let's go and let me share again here. And this is, I don't know what David's shown, but this is work that happened that David did after the microservice version of the show. This is the 3.1 application. And for folks who don't know it, you can actually right click on one of these types of applications. You can do publish, but I don't want to publish it to the cloud. I want to publish it to a folder. And once I do that, I have the ability to go and edit some of the settings. And if I go down here, hopefully you've shown this on the show before, I can decide between being self-contained or framework dependent. And so in this case, I've decided I want to be self-contained. Then I can choose down here, I want to make a single file. So self-contained by itself just takes all of your application and all the .NET Core and shoves it into the same folder. Then I can decide, I don't know why I wrote x86, I can decide to produce a single file. That means instead of having a pile of files, we just have a single file. And then there is this trim unused assemblies, which is called for preview because we don't have good tooling to prevent you from hurting yourself with this today. So meaning that the linker could, if you load an assembly with reflection, or if you load any dynamic code that loads an assembly, the linker is not going to see and can blow it out. But if I save that, I can now click the publish button, and we'll produce a single trimmed, super small microservice application. And let's go see what this is going to look like here.
And so some advantages of that, like one is if you're building Docker images or whatever, that you get more density, but also you get like quicker startup and better memory as well, right?
Yeah, well, it depends. There's other options there. There was ready to run.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But that ready to run option would help me with startup. Because what that does is that prevents us having to do some jigging when the application starts up. But you can see here, it's still crunching because it's doing a link. The end result of that's going to be about 40 megs. And in .NET 5, we've cut that down by about, there you go, 45 megs. Just finished. It's because I moved it to x64, I think. But if I switch over to my .NET 5 version of the same thing, and we do the exact same exercise, we will get a smaller file. And this is work that David did. It's the whole team is done, but what we did is we need to go make our frameworks tell the linker more about what they need. And so after we did the microservice.NET Conf, David went and attributed a bunch of the framework. That looks all the same. Got the linker on. There's your ready to run, John, which will make the startup faster. It'll make your size a little bit bigger, but the startup will be faster.
Oh, and the 64 is larger, right? So if you really wanted to shrink it down a little bit more.
Yeah, do X60. And I'll do this, do the same thing we did before while that runs. And I said, we still call this, I would call it, experimental, meaning that, and you can see the end result here is 21 megs. It's still producing it, so that'll update in a second. So you can see we cut it down by about half. But I hope in the .NET 6 journey, we're gonna do a lot of work to go make our libraries. We want to provide the tools for library authors to make their libraries linker friendly. We want to go do more what David did to ASP.NET and attribute our own frameworks to make them more linker friendly. So this ends up being maybe giving you an analyzer that you can run that'll show you where you might have wobbly stuff. But the end goal is basically to keep making .NET applications smaller and lighter and faster to start up. And once we do that step, I'm sure you folks have talked about Core RT before. Doing all the stuff to fix the linker will help the Core RT efforts as well and make more of .NET run on things like the Core RT projects and stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, we haven't really talked about that, so that'd be something to go into in more detail later. So, well, that was cool. I shared one. It's cool. People are excited about this. It's cool to see Paolo talking about, as a longtime Java JVM developer, he's evaluating this and excited about the future of .NET. So there's
often to hear people see the changes we've made in the platform and the improvements in it. We didn't even show that our gRPC implementation is one of the fastest ones out there. I think James has tweeted about it a few times. The only thing that was faster than us the last time there was a public benchmark run was Rust. But James thinks we've done enough to actually pass Rust maybe for the .NET 5 RTM.
There's a question here if .NET 5 will ever be part of Windows 10.
It will not. One of the core tenets of .NET, .NET 5 is primarily an evolution of .NET Core. It's you could almost call it .NET Core 5. But we mentioned before, we don't want to be an operating system component. As soon as it's a component of the operating system, then the compatibility version problems come to be, the servicing burdens come to be. There are no other frameworks that are part of the Windows operating system. Java's not built in, Node's not built in, Go's not built in, Rust is not built in. You want to be treated like the other frameworks, not be a Windows component. And we're also trying to make it very clear that we are not just a Windows platform.
That makes sense. Yeah. In all the things that you talked about in your slide at the beginning of decoupling it, kind of giving you the most flexibility and everything. This is an interesting question here on the naming of .NET Core, like calling it .NET 5. You shared with me early on that people had, got confused by seeing .NET 4.x and seeing that as a bigger number than .NET Core 3.1 and thinking 4.x is newer and better than 3. So.
Yep, I do think that naming it .NET 5 will help with some of that because people will go, oh, it's the next version of .NET. It's a little bit of a falsity though, because what we don't want is people, and we'll make sure we message this really good at .NET Conf and on the blogs. We did it 2 years ago, but .NET 5 does not have all the features of .NET Framework 4. It's still, there is no WCF, there is no workflow, there is no system web. But we thought the only way to solve the confusion problem was to put a bigger version number on it and make it clearly show that it's the future platform, whether it has all the APIs or not.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. And as a CTO or whatever, sometimes they're just looking at the numbers and it's very clear, and that was the name of your talk at Ignite was .NET 5 is the future, right? So cool. Well, those are amazing. It was great to have you on, and those were some cool demos and fun to look at the kind of the history of going back to 2013. anything else you want to tell people other than to show up at .NET Conf
big thing for me is try a .NET 5 preview right now, and because it's the last window to give us feedback on it, and show up at .NET Conf where we'll talk about a lot we'll go in full detail and depth, across all the updates and changes in .NET 5 at .NET Conf.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks a bunch, Scott. And as always, anytime you want to pop back in the show, we're happy to, see anything we can from you. This was great. So
thanks for having me, John.
All right. We'll see you at .NET Conf, and we'll see all our .NET Community Stand-Up viewers. We're on now every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. So goodbye.